My job was to read fear, and I was the best in the conclave at it. And the day the humans brought their Titan to the council, I read the most fear I had ever read in a single chamber. And almost all of it was coming from the wrong place. And it took me a long time to understand that the most frightened beings in that room were not the council looking at the human warship, but the humans who had brought it, and that I had spent my whole career mistaking the surface of fear for its source. My name is Ilarre Venthys-Oda. I am a Sethelen, a people with an unusual sensitivity, a capacity to perceive the emotional states of other beings directly, to read in another's posture and scent, and the small involuntary signals of the body, the thing they are actually feeling beneath the thing they are saying. It is a rare gift and a useful one, and the Sennifar Conclave employed me for it, in a specific role. I was a reader, an emotional analyst, assigned to first contact and high-stakes diplomacy, where my task was to sit in the chamber and tell the council what the other party was truly feeling beneath their words, so that the council could negotiate against the truth rather than the performance. I had read the fear of 100 delegations. I knew fear the way a physician knows a fever, its kinds, its sources, its tells. And I thought, before the humans came, that I understood it completely. I was wrong, and the humans taught me how wrong, and this is the story of the lesson. Let me tell you what the gift is actually like, because people imagine it as a kind of mind reading, and it is nothing of the sort, and the difference matters to this story. I cannot read thoughts. I cannot know what a being is planning, or what they believe, or what words they are about to say. What I read is the body's truth, the involuntary substrate beneath the performance, the feeling the body is having whether or not the mind admits it. A delegate can tell me in perfectly controlled words that they are confident and unconcerned, and I can read, off the set of their frame and the chemistry of their fear and 100 other signals they cannot suppress, that they are terrified. I read the gap. That is my whole profession, the gap between what a being performs and what their body cannot help but feel. And in 30 years of reading that gap, I had learned a thing that I thought was the deepest truth of my profession, which is that the powerful lie about fear more than anyone, that the great delegations of the great powers spend enormous effort performing fearlessness over bodies that are as afraid as anyone's, and that my value to the council was mostly in seeing through that particular performance, in telling the presiding officer asterisk they are afraid, whatever they are saying, they are afraid. I will give you one example, so you understand the craft before the humans break it. Years before the Titan, I read a delegation from a rival power that had come to the council to negotiate a border, and they performed throughout, a perfect serene confidence, and their words were all strength, and the council was inclined to believe they negotiated from a position of real power. And I read, beneath the serenity, a body in a state of controlled panic, the particular signature of a delegation whose strength is a bluff, who have come to the table weak and are performing strength because strength is all they have left. I told the presiding officer. The council negotiated against the truth instead of the performance, and won terms they would never have dared reach for had they believed the bluff. That is what I did. That is what I was good at. I found the frightened body under the confident words, every time, because the frightened body is always there, under the words, in every delegation that has ever entered that chamber. So when I tell you that the humans broke my understanding, understand the size of the claim. I had spent 30 years certain that the deepest truth of any delegation was the fear under their performance. The humans walked into the chamber with the most frightening object in the galaxy, and I went looking, as I always did, for the fear under their performance, and I found it. But it was not the fear I had spent 30 years learning to find. It was not the bluffer's panic or the suppliant's dread. It was a fear pointed in a direction I had never once read in all my career, and the direction it was pointed was the thing that taught me I had understood nothing. Let me tell you about the Titan, because the Titan is what everyone remembers, and the Titan is the thing the records describe, and the records are accurate and miss the entire point. The Sennifar Conclave had known the humans for 2 generations. A young species, admitted recently, capable but not remarkable, occupying a modest territory at the edge of the conclave's space. We knew they had a military. Every people has a military. We knew, vaguely, that the humans had a difficult history, that they had come into the conclave bearing the marks of some hard passage, the way some peoples do, but they did not speak of it and we did not ask, because the conclave is polite about the wounds of its members. And then, in a season of no particular crisis, the humans requested an audience before the full council, the highest body of the conclave, the gathering of the great powers, and they said they wished to bring something before us, to show us something. And the council granted the audience, expecting a trade proposal or a territorial matter, or one of the 1,000 ordinary businesses of the conclave. I want to tell you what I read off the human delegation when they first entered the chamber, before the ship, before any of it, because it troubled me and I set it aside, and I should not have. They entered the way no delegation I had ever read entered. A delegation comes into the council chamber carrying the emotional posture of its purpose. The eager come in bright and forward. The supplicants come in tight and anxious. The aggressors come in hard and braced. And after 30 years I could read a delegation's intent from the doorway, before a word, from the shape of what they carried in. And the humans entered carrying something I had no template for. They came in the way you walk to a thing you have been dreading for a very long time, and have finally, with great effort, resolved to do slow, heavy, deliberate. The emotional posture not of people arriving at a negotiation, but of people arriving at a reckoning. I read no eagerness and no aggression and no supplication. I read resolve laid over dread, the specific texture of a being who has decided to do a hard, necessary, frightening thing, and has spent a long time getting to the decision. I remember thinking, watching them take their places, that they moved like a delegation coming to surrender. But that was not quite it either, because there was no defeat in them, only the weight, and I could not name it, and I set it aside as the strangeness of a young species and turned my attention to the business of the session. I have thought many times since that if I had trusted that first reading instead of setting it aside, I would have understood everything 10 minutes sooner. But the ship was about to appear, and the ship pulled all the attention in the room, including mine, for just long enough. The humans brought a warship. I was in the chamber when it arrived. Not the ship itself, of course, the ship was vast. It held its position outside, but its image, rendered in full in the great display of the council chamber, and I felt the chamber's reaction before I saw the ship, because I am a reader, and the spike of emotion that went through the assembled council when the human vessel resolved in the display was the sharpest I had felt in my career. It was fear. Pure, immediate, instinctive fear, the fear of a body that has seen a predator, and it came off the entire council at once, every delegation, every great power, a wave of it, and I sat in my reader's place and was nearly overwhelmed by the force of it, the whole chamber's terror breaking over me like surf. I should tell you what that is like for a reader, because it is the part of my gift that is not a gift. I do not merely observe emotion at a distance, the way you might note an expression on a face. I feel it in my own body, the emotion of those around me, dampened but real, and a chamber full of the great powers of the galaxy all spiking into instinctive terror at the same instant, is a thing that happens asterisk to asterisk me, physically, a flood I have to hold against in order to keep reading rather than simply drowning in the shared feeling. I had trained, over 30 years, to hold against it, to stay separate enough to analyze the flood instead of being swept by it. And when the Titan resolved in the display, the flood that hit me was the largest of my career, the combined instinctive terror of every great power in the galaxy, and for a moment, I am not ashamed to admit it, I lost my separation. I was simply afraid, swept into the chamber's fear, my own body screaming the predator warning that every body in the room was screaming. It took me a moment to climb back out, to find the separation again, to become a reader again instead of one more terrified body. And it was in climbing back out, in re-establishing the distance that let me analyze rather than feel, that I did the thing my training had taught me to do, the thing that broke the case open. I stopped reading the room's fear, which was obvious and enormous and pulling at everyone including me, and I went looking for the one reading that the flood was drowning out, the reading no one else would think to take, which was the feeling of the humans themselves. Because the ship was terrible, I am not a military analyst. I cannot give you the specifications, and they are in the records if you want them. But I am a reader of fear, and I can tell you that the human warship was the single most frightening object the Sennifar Conclave had ever been shown, and that the Council's fear was not irrational, was not the fear of the ignorant, was the entirely correct response of sophisticated beings who understood exactly what they were looking at. The ship, the humans called it a Titan-class warship, and the name was not a boast. The name was a category, and it implied other categories below it, which was its own kind of terror. The ship was built on a scale and to a purpose that the Conclave's own war fleets did not approach. The great powers of the Council maintained formidable militaries. That was part of what made them great powers. And every delegate in that chamber understood, looking at the human Titan, that their formidable militaries were not relevant, that this single human vessel represented a category of force the Conclave had not known was possible, and that the modest, unremarkable humans at the edge of Conclave space had been quietly capable, all along, of building the most dangerous thing anyone had ever seen. The fear in the chamber curdled fast, the way fear does, into the things fear becomes. I read them all, the transformations, in real time because that was my job. I read the fear become suspicion. Why are they showing us this? What is the threat? What do they want? I read the fear become calculation. Can we destroy it? Can we match it? Can we ally against it? I read the fear become anger in some of the prouder delegations, the anger of powerful beings who do not like to be made afraid. And I read, beneath all of it, the oldest transformation, the one fear always makes in the end, which is the conclusion that the frightening thing must be a threat, that a people who possess such a weapon must intend to use it, that the only reason to build a Titan is to dominate, and that the humans had come to the Council to announce, in the language of overwhelming force, that the Conclave's days of treating humanity as modest and unremarkable were over. That is what the Council read in the human ship. That is what the records record. The human Titan arrived, and the Council fell into fear, and the fear became the certainty that humanity had come to threaten the galaxy, and the chamber prepared itself in those first minutes for the demand it was sure was coming, the demand that always comes from a power that reveals a weapon: submit, defer, yield, or be destroyed. But I was a reader, and I was not reading the ship. I was reading the humans, and the humans were not feeling what a people feels when they have come to threaten. I want to tell you what I read off the human delegation in those minutes, because it was the strangest thing I had ever read, and it was the beginning of my understanding, and it was completely invisible to everyone else in the chamber, because everyone else was looking at the ship, and I was looking at the people who built it. The humans were afraid. That was the first wrong thing, the thing that did not fit. They had brought the most frightening object in the galaxy into the chamber, and they themselves were afraid, not of the Council. I could read the difference. Their fear was not the fear of a delegation worried about its reception. They were afraid of the asterisk ship. They had brought a thing into that room that frightened them, that they did not want to be near, that they regarded, I read this clearly, and could not understand it, the way you regard a thing you are ashamed of, a thing you wish did not exist, a thing whose existence is a wound you carry. The human delegation looked at the image of their own Titan in the Council display, with an emotion I had read many times before but never ever from a people displaying their own power, and the emotion was grief. Deep, old, settled grief, the grief of people standing at a grave, and under it something that took me longer to name because it was so out of place on the faces of the powerful, and the something was shame. I want to be precise about how strange this was to read, because the strangeness is the whole of why it mattered. In 30 years I had read every emotion a delegation can carry into that chamber, but always the emotions had been pointed asterisk outward, at the council, at the rivals across the floor, at the stakes of the negotiation. A delegation's feeling is almost always about the room it is in, and the human's deepest feeling was not about the room at all. It was pointed at the ship, at their own power, the thing they had brought, and it was the feeling a person has toward the worst thing they have ever done. I had read murderers in my time. The council deals with hard beings. I knew the particular signature of a being in the presence of their own atrocity, the specific weight of standing near the evidence of one's own worst act. And that was what I was reading off the human delegation, impossibly, in a chamber where they had just revealed themselves to be the most powerful people present. The signature of beings standing in the presence of their own atrocity. They were not proud of the Titan. They were haunted by it. They had brought their own worst act into the room, and they could barely stand to look at it. I sat in my reader's place, with the whole council's terror breaking over me, and I read the human delegation grieving and ashamed before their own warship. And I understood, before anyone else in that chamber, that we had the entire situation backwards, that the humans had not come to the council to make us afraid, that the fear in the room was a misreading, that whatever the Titan was, it was not a threat being brandished but a burden being carried, and that the humans had come to the council not in pride, but in something much closer to confession. I leaned to the council's presiding officer, whose ear I had, whose whole purpose in keeping me near was to know the truth beneath the performance, and I told her the thing I was reading, the thing that made no sense, the thing that turned out to be the key to everything. I said, "They're not threatening us. Read me carefully, because I have never said this of a people showing their weapon. They're afraid of it too. They're grieving. Whatever that ship is, they didn't bring it here to frighten us. They brought it here because they're frightened of it, and they need something from us, and it isn't surrender. I don't know what it is yet, but that ship is not a threat. That ship is a wound, and they've brought it to us open." The presiding officer was a wise old being named Sethelen Valhale, and she had kept me at her side for 2 decades precisely for moments like this, when the truth in the room diverged from the appearance of the room, and she trusted my reading more than she trusted her own eyes, which is the rarest and most valuable thing a powerful person can do, to believe the instrument that contradicts their instinct. She did not doubt me. She did not say that is impossible, look at the ship. She heard that the humans were grieving, and she adjusted, in an instant, the entire posture of the council's response. Because if the humans were not threatening, then the demand for explanation that protocol required, the cold state your intentions that the council was about to issue, was exactly the wrong move, was the move that would wound a people who had come in pain and turn a confession into a confrontation. And so when the chamber had quieted, Sethelen Valhale did not demand. She asked. Gently, the way you speak to someone carrying something heavy, she asked the humans the question that changed the meaning of the entire day. Not what is the meaning of this weapon, but simply, quietly, why have you brought this to us? And I felt, across the floor, the human delegation receive that gentleness and register that they had been read correctly, that someone in the chamber had seen past the ship to the wound, and I read the relief move through them, the relief of the confessor who finds, against all hope, that they will be heard with mercy rather than judgment. The human delegation was led by an old woman, old for a human, which is old enough, and her name was Admiral Imara Sefudaloran, and she had the bearing of someone who had carried something heavy for a very long time and had finally come to set it down. When Sethelen Valhale's quiet question reached her, "Why have you brought this to us?" the Admiral stood, and she answered, and her answer is the thing I am here to tell you. She did not explain the ship's capabilities. The council wanted that, was braced for that, the recitation of force that a power gives when it reveals a weapon. She skipped it entirely. Instead, she said, "We didn't bring it here to show you what it can do. You can see what it can do. Anyone can see it. That's the point of a thing like this, it announces itself. It doesn't need a demonstration. We brought it here to tell you what it cost, and to ask you to help us make sure it can never be used again, not by us, not by anyone, and to make sure that when we tell you how to build one, which we're going to do, you understand why you must never, ever build it. And then she told us the history the humans had never spoken, the hard passage they had borne in silence since they joined the Conclave, the thing that had made them what they were, and built the Titan and broke something in them that had never healed. I will give it to you as she gave it to us plainly, because the plainness was the most devastating part. 2 generations before humanity joined the Conclave, in the time the Conclave knew nothing about, humanity had fought a war, not with another species, with itself. A war among humans, the worst in their history, fought with the full weight of a technological civilization turned against its own kind, and it had been an extinction-level war, a war that humanity had very nearly not survived, a war that had ended not in victory, but in something humanity had no better word for than the thing we did to stop it. Because the war had reached a point, Admiral Sethelen voice did not change as she said this, which made it worse. The war had reached a point where one faction of humanity had built a weapon, the first Titan, a thing so powerful that it could end the war in a single stroke, and they had faced the choice that such a weapon always forces, which is whether to use it, and they had used it. Humanity had used the Titan on itself, on its own people, on a faction of its own species, and it had ended the war exactly as promised, in a single stroke. And the single stroke had been a horror so complete that Admiral Sethelen would not describe it, said only that there were places on the human homeworld that were still silent, 2 generations later, still empty, still marked, and that every human child was taught what had been done there, not as triumph, never as triumph, but as the wound at the center of what it meant to be human. We won the war, Admiral Sethelen said. That's the word the histories use. We won. And it is the most shameful sentence in our language, because of what winning meant, because of what we did to win, because the weapon that won it was a thing that should never have been built and could never be unbuilt. And once one faction had it, the others had to have it. And we came out of that war a species that knew how to build Titans, and could not unknow it, and had to live forever after, as a people who had done the unforgivable thing to ourselves, and possessed the means to do it again. And the council was silent. I read the silence, and it was no longer fear, or it was fear transformed into something I had rarely read in that chamber, which was the particular still horror of beings hearing a truth too large to perform a reaction to. The humans had not come to threaten. The humans had come to confess, and the confession was reorganizing the entire chamber's understanding, because the Titan was no longer a weapon being brandished. It was the evidence of a crime the humans had committed against themselves, brought before the council the way a penitent brings the instrument of their worst act. Admiral Sethelen went on. She explained why they had come now, after 2 generations of silence. She said that humanity had spent those 2 generations doing 2 things at once, and that the 2 things had finally become impossible to continue holding together. The first thing was keeping the Titans, maintaining them, the terrible fleet the war had left them, because in a galaxy of great powers, a young species that disarmed unilaterally was a young species that would be devoured, and so humanity had kept its Titans as the grim price of survival, had joined the Conclave under the protection of weapons it was ashamed to possess, had sat among us modest and unremarkable while holding in reserve the means of an atrocity. And the second thing was the shame of it, the slow, unbearable weight of being a people who survived by holding a thing they believed should not exist. And Admiral Sethelen said that the second thing had finally grown heavier than the first, that humanity had reached a point where it could no longer live as the secret holder of the worst weapon in the galaxy, that the holding was poisoning them, generation on generation, that a people cannot stay whole while maintaining in secret the instrument of their own greatest shame. So we made a decision, she said, and it's why we're here, and it's going to sound insane to a chamber full of great powers, because it violates everything your power teaches you. We decided to give it up. Not to disarm quietly and hope no one notices and gets devoured. We're not naive. We decided to do it in the open, in front of all of you, the whole conclave, and to make our disarmament your business, to put the Titans beyond use under the witness and the guarantee of the entire council, so that no human faction could ever secretly rebuild them, and no other power could pick them off for having disarmed, because the whole conclave would have witnessed and underwritten the thing. We're asking you to help us put down a weapon we can't put down alone. And we're going to pay for it by telling you everything, how they're built, what they do, what they cost, not so you can build your own, but so that you understand completely why you must never, and so that the knowledge of how to build a Titan stops being humanity's terrible secret and becomes the conclave's shared warning, a thing the whole galaxy knows and the whole galaxy has agreed, together, never to make. And I read the council receiving this, and I want to tell you that the fear was entirely gone now, burned away, replaced by something I had almost never read in that chamber of great powers, something I had honestly thought such beings were no longer capable of, which was awe, not the awe of force, the cheap awe the Titan had first commanded, but the deeper awe of witnessing a thing one did not believe was possible, the awe of powerful beings watching another power do the one thing power never does, which is to voluntarily, deliberately, in the full light of witness, lay itself down. I wish I could tell you that the council rose to the moment immediately, that the great powers heard the human confession and were transformed. They did not at first, because great powers are great powers, and the first instinct of a great power, hearing that a rival intends to disarm, is not awe but opportunity. I read it move through the chamber, the calculation, even through the awe, the old reflex, surfacing in delegation after delegation. The humans are giving up their weapons. The humans are making themselves vulnerable. This is not a moment for reverence. This is a moment for advantage. I read several of the great powers begin, immediately, to think about how to exploit a disarming humanity, how to move into the space a weaponless human territory would leave, how to be the power that benefited from human conscience. It sickened me, reading it, and it would have proven every grim thing the humans believed about why they had to keep the Titans in the first place. That a galaxy of great powers cannot be trusted, that conscience is a luxury that gets you devoured, that the only safe thing to hold is more force than your neighbor. And then Admiral Sethelen did the thing that saved it, the thing I have thought about every day since, because it was the deepest reading of power I have ever witnessed, and it came from a human who could not read emotions at all, who simply understood her own kind and ours through long, bitter experience. She had anticipated the calculation. Of course she had. Humanity had spent 2 generations learning exactly how power thinks. And so she had built into her confession a thing that turned the great powers' own logic against their predatory instinct, and she revealed it now, at exactly the moment the calculation was rising in the chamber. "I know what some of you are thinking," she said, "because I'd be thinking it too in your place. You're thinking that a disarming humanity is a humanity you can finally move on. So let me be clear about the shape of what we're proposing, because we did not design it as charity. We designed it as a trap for exactly that instinct. We are not disarming into a vacuum. We are disarming into the witness and the guarantee of the entire conclave, which means that the moment this council accepts our disarmament, the council becomes the guarantor of human security. Every power in this chamber will have publicly underwritten the safety of a humanity that gave up the worst weapon in the galaxy in good faith. And any power that then moves on us, any power that exploits our disarmament, will not be attacking humanity. It will be attacking the word of the entire conclave, breaking a guarantee witnessed by every great power, proving to every smaller species in the galaxy that the conclave's protection is worthless and that conscience is suicide. You will not be devouring a weak humanity. You will be destroying the one thing that makes you great powers, which is the belief of the small that your word means something. We have made our disarmament too expensive to exploit. Not by force, we're giving up our force. By making our survival the test of whether the conclave is real, refuse to protect us, and you announce to the galaxy that the conclave is a lie. That's the trap. We built it as carefully as we built the Titan, and it's the better weapon, and it's the last one we'll ever need. And I read the chamber understand it, and I read the predatory calculation die, delegation by delegation, not because the great powers had suddenly grown consciences, but because Admiral Sethelen had made conscience the only rational choice, had constructed a situation in which betraying humanity cost more than protecting it, had used the great powers' self-interest to bind them to an act of collective decency. It was the most extraordinary piece of statecraft I have ever witnessed, and its genius was that it did not require anyone to be good. It only required them to be rational, and it made rationality and decency, for once, the same thing. The conclave accepted the human disarmament. It took years to execute the actual decommissioning of the Titans, the public dismantling, the establishment of the shared knowledge and the shared prohibition, the construction of the guarantees. I was present for much of it, in my reader's role, and I watched the thing humanity had begun in that chamber slowly remake the conclave. Because once the Titan's existence was known, once the knowledge of how to build them became the conclave's shared and dreaded secret, the whole galaxy had to reckon with the fact that such a thing was possible, and the reckoning changed us. The conclave established, for the first time, a true collective prohibition, not just on Titans, but on the whole category of weapons that could end a species, a shared agreement, witnessed and guaranteed by all, that some powers must never be built, and that the building of them would be the concern of the entire conclave and not the private business of any one people. Humanity's confession became the galaxy's law. The wound at the center of what it meant to be human became the thing that protected every people in the conclave from making the same wound in themselves. I spoke with Admiral Sethelen once, near the end of the long disarmament, when she was very old and the last of the Titans was being dismantled. I asked her the question I had carried since the chamber, the reader's question, the one I could not answer from the outside. I asked her whether it had been worth it, whether laying down the weapons, after everything, after the war, after the 2 generations of grim survival, had eased the thing I had read off the human delegation that first day, the grief and the shame. Whether putting the Titan down had let the humans set down the wound. And she thought about it in her old human way, and she told me the truth, which was harder and better than the comfort I had been hoping for. She said, "No, it doesn't ease it. Nothing eases it. That's not how the worst things work. We did what we did in the war, and we'll carry it forever, and putting down the weapon doesn't undo the thing the weapon did. The shame isn't going anywhere." She paused. "But there's a difference between carrying a wound and feeding it. Holding the Titans was feeding it. Every day we maintained them. We were a people actively choosing to keep the means of our worst act ready to hand. And that choice was poisoning us, generation after generation, making us a little more the kind of people who could do it again. Putting them down doesn't heal the wound, but it stops the feeding. We'll always be the people who did that, but we're no longer the people who are keeping the door to it open. That's not nothing. That's the most a people who did what we did can hope for, not to be forgiven, not to be healed, but to stop, finally, being a danger to everyone including themselves. We came to your council to stop feeding the wound, and we did, and it's enough because it has to be. I am old now myself, a reader at the end of a long career of reading fear, and I have read a great deal of it, and the humans changed what I understood the word to mean. The council fell into fear the day the Titan arrived. I felt it, the sharpest fear of my career, the whole chamber's terror at the sight of the human warship. And I spent that fear, and the years after it, learning that I had misread it, that the fear in the room was the smallest and shallowest thing in that chamber, that the real event was happening on the faces of the people everyone else was too frightened to look at, the people who had brought the terrible thing not to wield it but to be rid of it, who were more afraid of their own weapon than we could ever be, and who had come to us, ashamed and grieving, to ask for help putting down a thing they could not put down alone. When aliens first witnessed humanity's Titan-class warship, the Council fell into fear. That part is true, and it is in every record. But it is the least true thing about that day, the surface of it, the thing the frightened saw because they were too frightened to see deeper. What actually happened, the thing I read and almost no one else did, was that a people who had done the worst thing a people can do came before the galaxy carrying the proof of it, and laid it down, and asked us to help them make sure no one ever picked it up again, and taught the whole conclave by the example of their grief, the thing they had learned the hardest possible way. That the most powerful weapon in the galaxy is not the one you build, but the moment you decide together in the open to put it beyond anyone's reach, including your own. The fear faded. It always does. Fear is shallow and it does not last. What lasted was the other thing, the thing under the fear, the thing I read on the faces of the humans that first day and have never forgotten. They were not proud of the most powerful warship in the galaxy. They were ashamed of it, and in their shame they were braver and stronger and more worth following than any power I have ever read who was proud of their strength. The Council fell into fear, and then slowly, led by a grieving old woman and the terrible ship she came to bury, the Council fell into something better, something the galaxy had never managed before, something I did not believe great powers could feel. The Council fell into shame, and then into resolve, and the galaxy has been safer ever since, because a people who had earned the right to be feared chose instead to be honest about what being feared had cost them. And we listened, because the one reading I could give the Council that day, the truest reading of my career, was this: that ship is not a threat. That ship is a wound, and they have brought it to us open so that we never have to carry one of our own.